We're now inside the grounds of Biosphere 2 of Columbia University, probably a government-sponsored attempt to show how people could, I believe, live in a contained environment that was sustainable in essence, self-functioning, self-perpetuating. I don't know anything about it yet, except what I read here, so we'll see it now. It says that we'll discover, my guess is that we'll discover that many of these buildings are supportive of it or represent additional projects, and this has basically become a research center. So I can see it's very pretty. It's a windy day outside of Tucson, quite a ways outside of Tucson actually. We're probably 20 miles outside of Tucson. Blustery spring day. This is the original test module, and the original goal of Biosphere 2 was to create a closed system that could sustain human life for long periods of time. Before the large enclosure was built, the single-room version was constructed in 1987 to test the concept.
The one up there is pattern after one from South America, so a lot of the plants up there and in here came from South America, some came from Central America, some from Puerto Rico, and others were donated to us by the Missouri Botanical Gardens in St. Louis, and some by the New York Botanical Gardens. Now, our rainforests provide us with a lot of very important things. Just a few of those things, oxygen. When the sun shines on the leaves of all these plants in here, they undergo photosynthesis. They take in carbon dioxide and produce oxygen for us to breathe. Another thing we get from our rainforest are some fibers. The tree right in front of me, the one with all these thorns on the trunk, is called a kapok tree. And that tree produces a pod, and inside that pod is a fiber that's used in making pillows, sleeping bags, and life jackets. The tree to the far right of the kapok tree, the tall, slender one right next to the wall, is called an angel's trumpet. And parts of the angel's trumpet are used in making an asthma medication. Any questions? Decaying vegetation. They also took in domestic stock. They took in some goats, pigs, and chickens to be used as a food source.
We're getting closer to the complex, and I just thought I'd give you a closer look. We'll be going up now to this taller structure, which, for the obvious reason that it's the rainforest and has tall trees, is the tallest structure here. These modules have the look of something you see in the space movie of modules that would be used on different planets, and it may well be that these are the prototype for them. What you're looking at here, this long structure, is Biosphere 2. The largest greenhouse in the world and one of the most remarkable structures ever built. Yes, I am reading this. It houses living organisms from 5 natural biomes comprising more than 1,000 species of plants and animals, research agricultural areas, and the former human habitat. Beneath the structure, miles of pipes, tubings, and wirings, wastewater tanks, and other facilities make up a technosphere designed to recreate the Earth's recycling functions. Its infrastructure. The dome-shaped lungs beyond Biosphere 2 are connected to the main structure by tunnels. I'll explain those to you if you'd like to know. They allow for air expansion due to changes in pressure inside the greenhouse. The whole building is sealed off from the desert soil by a welded 1/8-inch thick stainless steel liner. Interesting comment here. The rainforest, the largest biome. This is in Biosphere 2 appropriate because of the estimated 4 million species of living things on Earth. About 3 million of them live in rainforests, even though rainforests cover only 10% of the land. Of course, we're destroying those rapidly. Now we're back in behind the rainforest, and I'm just showing you these modules. I'm not sure what they are yet. I think those were living quarters, but I'm not sure. This is a beautiful complex, beautifully done, beautifully created, beautifully maintained, and beautifully graded upward to accommodate the tourist. This was the original greenhouse that was used as a test for not only the caulking that goes for the windows, because there's 50 miles of caulking in the actual finished huge Biosphere number 2, but it was also used for checking air and livability. Each person who was going to be living in there had to spend time in it. But I want you to tell me, what was the major problem that they had with this greenhouse and danger, and actually precipitated the creation and the use of this device over here, which, to give you a hint, works as a combination of an overflow container that you have on a radiator, and it also works like the water pressure tank for a water pump system that has a bladder in it. And if you don't understand these two concepts, I'll be glad to explain them to you. What I want you to do is figure out what the problem is. It was with this, that it was a dangerous problem, and it's related to global warming. It's related to the greenhouse effect. Those are enough clues to give you the means to answer that question. Okay, we're in the original test greenhouse, which was used to test the various combinations or varieties of plants to see how they might function on the grander scale of the Biosphere 2 when it was completed. This, of course, is the tropical jungle, which to me is somewhat intriguing right at this moment, because I've just returned from 2.5 months in Mexico and Central America, Guatemala and Belize, where immediately and constantly you're in this high humidity, high temperature. This is actually fairly mild. I have a sweater on. I feel rather comfortable. You can see the steam coming out of the top there. You don't see, at least I didn't see, that kind of steam, but it certainly indicates the amount of water that would be in here, and all about us it's dripping. But this looks very much like what I would have encountered to some degree. In this section in here, another portion of that same area tests various microsystems. This, for example, is a system that is looking at the combination of plants and animals required to grow rice. This is a rice, and in there is a kind of I think a fungus that's growing on top, and then there's a certain fish that lives in the water, and it eats the fungus. When it defecates, that excretion, it becomes the fertilizer for the rice, and you've got a continuous cycle. And then once every, I think it is 3 or 4 weeks, they siphon off any rice that's been produced and the larger of the fish to consume. And over here, a small pool for checking out other living organisms that might be used, because they did have kind of meat devices. I mean, animals like the turtle, the fish, there were goats and animals like that also. Here's a typical desert environment. You can see the iguanas over there. Perhaps used for food. I did not hear them mention rats, which are high in protein and reproduce rapidly. Nor did I hear them mention rabbits, which do the same. And in various parts of the world have been used as very rapid, high protein, very efficient production of protein types of animals. And here's a big fella. There must be something inside these cages disguised as a pot, because I can't figure out where the animal is. But assuming they had one. These are other probably just descriptions of various kinds of little critters. Here's an emperor scorpion, if you've never seen one. I haven't. And up here, if we can find him, oh, there she is. I think inside there, yeah, you can't see her, maybe right underneath there. Can't see her, but there's a rose tarantula. Saw a bunch of tarantulas down in Guatemala. They're almost totally harmless if you don't do something like try to pinch them. If you pick them up and hold them in your hand, they will just walk around until they get relaxed, and then they'll just kind of stand there and do what they feel like doing, but they won't bite you. Here's a couple of little critters. All of these, I'm sure, were at one time some kind of an experiment as to what could be used in this ecology that was being created and how they would fit in. Various kinds of fish, presumably the kind that's used to grow the rice, that I don't really know. Here, what we're going to walk into now is a simulation of the fog-laden Baja California desert and other kinds of desert that are given water mainly by fog. These represent plants here from Baja California. You can't see them well, but they grow and do photosynthesis in the wintertime, whereas these cactus plants, typical of Arizona, tend to do them more in the summer. So a combination of these two kinds of plants, in theory, give you a balance of the photosynthesis process all year long. Many of the plants in this portion of this test area, if you will, were designed to provide either food or varieties of food, and varieties for food. For example, those are coffee beans up there that we saw down in Guatemala, a fig tree over there. Because one of the hopes was that this would be a sustaining environment, so it would produce its own food. Banana trees, papaya, great number of papaya trees were apparently planted after the project began because the people found they were running out of food. Looks like strawberries, running out of food because the weather in Arizona at that time just happened to be very cloudy, so they didn't have the sunlight to give them the photosynthesis to provide the food that they needed to be self-sufficient. And here we can just see other kinds of plants, some very recognizable. I think those are cabbages, I'm not sure. These are probably melons of some sort, certainly tomatoes. I don't know what you do with the flowers. Here what they have created is microcosms or microsystems or microecosystems, whatever you want to call it. The white mangrove, something that would have been typical of where I was along the coast, I think, of Mexico. This kind of reddish colored water that comes from the degeneration and breakdown of the plant matter that you see that falls off the leaves and simply collects there. Another kind of environment here. This is the marsh environment, long streams and so forth. This tall building, of course, houses the rainforest, which is modeled after the South American rainforest, plants from Belize and Guatemala, other Central American, South American forests. show this to you. It has all the appearance of any other kind of environment, but in fact, of course, it's inside the Biosphere 2. And I think this is probably a marshland. You can see some ferns, not unlike what I have seen in Mexico, northern Mexico, middle Mexico. There's machinery here. This is a pH meter up here that measures the pH of the water in that little stream, because apparently organisms are extremely sensitive to a very narrow range of the pH. In other words, the acidity versus the baseness of the water system or the environment. This is a menu, or shows a celebration rather, food from a celebration of the first year, at the end of the first 2 years that the 8 people were in and living solely inside this, which is the Human Habitat Center. This large television screen was upstairs in what's now a rec, what was then a rec area, and is now just off limits. Here is a micro-tropical scene, of course, very typical of what you see in southern Mexico and Central America. This was the typical menu. It was a menu that included most often a porridge in the morning of some sort. Presumably they grew that. That was made somewhat interesting by the various plants and so forth that they also grew, like probably various berries and so forth. The people who lived in here were trained to be cooks, because once every 8 days they had to cook and cook well. In 1991, this kitchen contained everything that was the most up-to-date that you could get, including a yogurt maker, and it looks like pretty much an industrial kitchen also. As we go through this, you'll see these facilities were top of the line. This was not a let's get the tent and go out for the weekend in the bush type of an adventure. This was a multi-million-dollar project that was very, very well financed. And upstairs here we'll see some of the rooms of the people. Each person had their own room, and that appears, we'll see in a moment, that was quite nice. Here, for example, is a typical room with a window that probably wasn't here, of one of the bionauts, I think they were called. I suspect that it has a bed perhaps through that room there, but a full electronic system. This was fully electrically equipped with, I mean the entire Biosphere was, not just these rooms, but with fax, computer, everything that was up to date in 1991. This area that we're looking at here is a 1/4 acre land plot that was used primarily, if not solely, for the creation of the food that they would consume, at least as to vegetable matter. I think underneath here were pens for animals also. Now this entire unit here will be used as an experiment to evaluate the effect on various plants of varying ratios of gases in the air, principally, of course, the greenhouse gases, and principally what it's measuring is the effect of greenhouse warming on plants that man may be dependent upon. I'm going to pan through here just so you can see the sophistication, the modernness of this plan. Notice the panels are the triangular formation that we could see from the outside. This was, I think, called the industrial kind of design, or high-tech. Everything is exposed, the structure, this being metal piping bolted together. Here you see some interesting design elements. Not sure why that door opens up into space, but it does. And presumably these had other functions for the staff at that time that are closed off now. And this room housed the we'll call it the technical controls, the computer controls, computer programs for misting, for water, probably for several other kinds of functions throughout this fairly large system. For example, there are over 23 huge air handlers that control the temperature and the movement of air. And this is a stairway that will exit down. Here's a good example of a model of the greenhouse effect. Here you have part of the earth inside of a greenhouse. You've got the sun coming in. The large number one is insulation. The smaller part is that which is reflected back into space. Then you have that heat which is returned to space, and that reflects inside the greenhouse, and then that which manages to escape the greenhouse, but enough stays in to increase it. Now the way you can measure that, notice what they've got. On the outside of the greenhouse is a thermometer indicating 65 degrees. Inside the thermometer, inside the greenhouse, one indicating 80 degrees, 85 degrees. So this might be an idea of how you could have drawn some idea. This is the chart for nitrous oxide since 1750. What we're looking at is the bottom of a stalagmite, which, as you know, grows in caves from erosion, a form of erosion. And they are like trees, and the rings of trees, you're able to determine something about the climate. Now, for example, if you look at this one, you can tell that it grew for quite some thousands of years here, and then stopped growing. And the only time these things grow is during warm periods, when there's a great deal of moisture, so that the water can move freely through the limestone rock formations. But then what happened was it quit growing because they had a dry period right in here, right in that part right there. And then later, when the climate changed again and it started to grow, the water source had shifted from a point probably directly above here to directly above here. So you see this thing looks like it's shifted over a little bit, and it has. And then it grew for a few more thousands of years. These little holes are holes that scientists have drilled to test, but that's another interesting source, a natural source of dating, if you will, and of determining climate periods in the sequence of them. Okay, here's the classic problem of matching tree rings. When you take a magnified view of a core from a living tree and a magnified view of a core from an old cabin, like this one here, and you're trying to compare it. Now I'm going to slide these along. As you can see from these arrows here how these lock up. Okay, so now they're locked right up. You can see how they connect right here, right here. That's how you do another form of dating. Because you know the date of this cabin was 1820. So now you can tell when this tree grew, sometime between the period of 1780 to 1900. Here's something kind of interesting that I'll try to show you. It's in New York City. There's the Empire State Building, as it would have been had it existed about 20,000 years ago when it was covered with ice. I mean, is that a premise for a science fiction story or movie or what? I mean, there was Water World. How about Ice World? Dun dun dun. This would have been part of the world you lived in as one of the Biosphere knots, or whatever they called them. And apparently, when these people lived here for 2 years, they worked pretty hard, 12 to 14 hours a day, most of which was spent right here. And that was working in these gardens, because these gardens were not just quaint little hobbies for people who liked to tell their friends that they were eating natural, homegrown tomatoes. They either ate these things or the experiment would die because of lack of food, and they did suffer some problems physically from the lack of food during that first 2-year period. On the the other hand, this looks like it's been an exciting place and still would be an exciting place to have the adventure of spending even a couple of weeks living and existing in this environment. It would give us all a clear sense, if you will, of how it is that we do survive on this earth that we take for granted, when everything on it is intimately tied to everything else. And if you throw a pebble in the pond, the ripples affect everything. So everything we do as human beings ultimately affect not only all other human beings, not only all other life forms, but all of that which we call Earth. What you can see as I move along in here, because we've got the reflection, if you will, of the sky, but this is a desert environment. And it's a desert that typifies Baja California as well as the Middle East. I don't know the names of these plants, these cactuses, but some are very familiar, some are vaguely familiar from traveling in the Baja. And probably some of these things are seen in Southern California also. But you can imagine what a fun thing it would be to work in a place with ceilings like this and have certain environments, particularly if they even had a few of the animals actually living in here that would live in this ecosystem, like rabbits and so forth. How fascinating that might be. But how fascinating it would be to experiment with this, a huge laboratory of this dimension that reflects as precisely as man can do it, and this is as precise as man has done it yet, recreate parts of Earth, and including all of the factors that make that ecosystem what it is, an ecosystem. Notice how that hill rises up in the rocks and cactuses there. There's large holes in that rock. There are airports for moving air in and out of this area. But how similar this looks to places I've been in Arizona just in the last few weeks. You can see the wind blowing in there. That's a false created wind, of course. We're still looking inside, now we shift to the outside. An interesting architectural structure in its own right. This is a marsh area, probably a coastal marsh area. It looks very much like the areas I kayaked in southern Mexico, on the Gulf of Mexico. And the way the biosystem functions here, they actually have tide machines that create the diurnal tides, the twice daily tides, so that again, as much as can be natural here, created by man, is done.